Fake news. Do we have fake news here? Before I go to the panel, I want to go to Charlotte with an expert on this issue. Charlotte.
Professor Claire Robinson from Massey University is with me. Claire, do we have fake news in New Zealand?
Well, we don't have... Oh, God.
Oh, yes we do.
Well, is that fake news?
We don't have fake news in the sense of news that's been planted by Russians or Macedonians, which is one of the problems that they have had in the United States. And we don't have fake news in the sense of news that's been made up by news organisations. We're too small a country to be able to do that. But we do have there is a fine line that we draw between fake news and real news, and that is the problem at the moment in New Zealand.
Can you go into detail? Like, what does that mean?
So there's a couple of aspects. One is that the news media, and forgive me, everybody standing around here, is quite biased in terms of the stories that they cover, so that they'll cover stories about scandal, they'll cover stories about who's winning, who has really pissed the news media off on a day, and that means that the news that people follow isn't actually the real news that people want to get.
The media are deciding what story to show.
Yeah, and there's a very narrow field of what's newsworthy. And then the other problem is that there is a fine line between what is news and what is opinion these days. So you might get a news journalist, Paddy Gow is a great example, who will stand on TV3 News and he will try to be objective in his reporting, and then he will switch to being an opinion writer on a website or a blog. And so if you are watching Paddy, you don't necessarily know whether he's the objective Paddy or the opinionated Paddy. And when that sits on a social media platform where everything is the same number of characters, for example, on Twitter, there is no definition or nothing that distinguishes opinion from news. And so that's where the blurs happen.
That is so fascinating.
That's interesting. Round of applause for Claire there. That's quite fascinating. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Okay, let me pick up on that then around the panel briefly. Do you trust, like Wisdom Peter said, he sees fake news every night at the 6 p.m. news. Kris Faafoi, do you trust the New Zealand media?
Most of the time.
And you used to work in the media?
That's why I'm saying most of the time.
All right, okay, so you're a political journalist. Chris Bishop, do you trust the New Zealand media?
Yeah, broadly, I think like every politician, they get some things wrong, they get some things right, you know, but broadly, yep.
Jan Logie, do you trust the New Zealand media?
I don't always necessarily see the information that I have or the knowledge or my perspective reflected in the media. And I know it's really hard for the Greens. Like last election, we got 1% of the coverage. So I do recognise that it's quite easy to see that there's a bias. But I still have a sense of that they're not like actively constructing some, you know, falsehoods and feeding them out to me. It's kind of a matter of, is it entirely reflecting all of us?
Okay, all right. Peter Dunne, I mean, you've been a politician since 1984. Do you trust these days the New Zealand media?
Generally, yes. However, I do think that some of the things that Claire talked about are developing much more strongly. I think in the mix of opinion and fact. But I also think we're getting a lack of critical judgment quite often, where stories are being reported with a seriousness that they don't deserve. The hypocrisy and the cant that lies behind them isn't being exposed, and I think that's where we run into.
What's an example?
Oh, I think some of the stuff that's being said about the immigration debate, for instance, which is becoming extremely emotive about numbers and people and origins and everything else. There's very little emphasis being placed on the positive contribution that migrants make to this country, and I think the media is actually just playing the game of the bigots, basically.
Wow. Okay. Whoa. I want to pick up on a story, Kris. This one was interesting. There's a strange case of what's happened to MP Todd Barclay. A local reporter went looking for him, couldn't find him. They stayed only a minute in his office, but then the Prime Minister's office got involved, accusing the reporter of harassing the staff. And if stuff didn't have the video evidence, the allegations would have stuck. Was that concerning to you?
Well, I honestly haven't even seen that, so I don't know. But I mean, it doesn't sound great.
It does
But-
not sound
but I
great, and
don't-
it
I haven't
wasn't
seen
great.
the- I
Do you
haven't
know what
seen
I'm
the
talking
story.
about, Kris?
Yeah, I've seen the video.
And what do you think of it?
Well, what the video showed was not the situation that the Prime Minister's office described.
What do you think of that, Snow Jan?
I
You
haven't
haven't even
seen
seen
it,
it,
no.
Peter?
I haven't seen it either.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
okay. Do you think that we need to look at what for fake news in New Zealand
Can I,
society?
can I just make a point, just what Peter said? I sort of agree with Peter about the migrant debate. And actually, Winston Peters is the guy who's fanning the flames of that with erroneous information and false information. But the great thing about media today in New Zealand is the diversity of the voices. I mean, websites like Newsroom, which broke the Todd Barclay scandal, and the Spin-Off. I love those websites because they're providing an alternative voice for often very objective, very
Jan,
fact-based
you don't
good
agree?
journalism.
Well, no, I just have a concern around the online space because I see in my Facebook thread I get views that reinforce my biases.
Yeah, that is an
you know,
issue, yeah.
and I do think we need to protect and support that public space, that collective space
Fair point.
journalism. And I think it's really tough
And where's
for the
that
journos.
happening?
Well, it's not getting enough support at the moment.
Tell you what.
Hang on, let's go to Donald first because this is fake news.
Donald Trump, are you to blame for fake news? What do you think about fake news?
Fake news is terrible, okay? I've got a lot of support. Just listen to this crowd. They all love me, okay? Listen. Yeah, thousands of people. Thousands of people. And the fake news media are going to try to tell you there's only like 30 people here. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. Let me tell you.
There's more than 30.
There's what? I know. Obviously, there's like 30 to 40,000 people here. It's insane. You wouldn't believe it. They're not going to report it. The cameraman, he doesn't know what he's doing. Look at him. Smiling his ass at me. Being all sassy.
Well, it's
Peter, you were going to say.
I think what's been happening over the years is increasingly the media has been dealing itself into the story. Rather than just being the objective reporter of what's going on, I think we've started to see a trend where they have to be a part of the story, it's either by an opinion or an inflection, and I think that is what is, if you like, over time, corroding credibility. And
What do people think of that idea? Do you agree with Peter? Kris, you've been a reporter before. What do you make of what Peter Dunne says?
He's right. It's an easier story to tell if you're part of it. And newsrooms are getting smaller. That's no secret. And I think that's what they have to do to make sure they can
So
put the stuff
what
out.
can we do? What's the solution to get? Where do
Well, you
you?
cannot-
Well, hang on. Where do you get your authentic news in New Zealand? Around the panel.
Radio New Zealand.
Thank you, Kris.
Breakfast Club with me and Kris Faafoi, 8:15
Yeah, I thought you were
on a
going to
Wednesday
say
morning.
that. I thought you were going to say that. Jan Logie, where do you get your authentic news in New Zealand?
You know, I'm going to be predictable. It is Radio New Zealand. It is supported for that public broadcasting, no commercial interest space. And I know all the other journos will be hating me for saying that. And it's not to, downplay their efforts because they're doing an amazing
Okay, that's
job.
enough. All right, where do you? Even though I work there, that's enough.
Yeah.
Where do you get your authentic news?
I'm another one for Radio New Zealand.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.